The crisis in the Catholic Church with pedophile priests has been well documented, but tonight, a very different look at this serious issue. A local church has banded together to fight back, to fight for their priest who they say has been wrongly accused, and they are suing the Archdiocese of Detroit to try and prove it. Joining us now is reporter Theresa Baldacci of the Detroit Free Press, who broke the story. Thanks for being here, Theresa.
Good to be here. Thanks for having me.
So tell me a little bit about this. I don't think I've ever heard of a lawsuit where the parishioners were suing to fight for their priest.
No, I hadn't either, and that's what first caught my attention. So I had some folks reach out to me and tell me about how upset they were that their priest was being that he had been removed. But what was even more startling was the argument that they felt that the church had somehow framed him, that the allegations not only were false against him, but that the church twisted the story of an accuser to get out a priest they didn't like because they felt he was too conservative.
Yeah, I mean, that just jumps right off the page of your reporting. I mean, for decades, the church has been accused of hiding pedophile priests, and it just seems so odd that now they would turn the tables and actually, push a case forward. By being conservative, what do you mean by that? Well, too conservative, what does that mean?
Well, I mean, as Father Perone explained too, he believes there's a strife in the Catholic Church, as the story pointed out, that you have more progressive liberal Catholics, and then you have your old school traditional Catholics, and that's kind of where he falls into place. If you go to his church, what you'll see things that you don't see in other churches. For example, number one, he has a Latin Mass. He has one Latin Mass, which is unusual. When you go up for communion, you don't go up and stand there. You have to kneel to get it, and on this long, kneeling bench. He'll put the communion wafer directly in your mouth rather than your hand. He doesn't think it should ever, for fear that it could fall on the ground and be tarnished. He has a very traditional and strict view of Catholic doctrine. Like you don't, for example, when you get divorced in the Catholic Church, if you don't get and you want to remarry, the Catholic Church, the old rules were that you couldn't get communion as a divorcee in the Catholic Church unless you had your marriage annulled. Well, he still sticks to that. So if there are remarried couples, divorced couples who've remarried, but they haven't had their marriages annulled, he won't give them communion. And that doesn't happen. In other parishes, you may have a Catholic priest that's a little more, I don't want to say willing to bend the rules, but just a little bit maybe more progressive.
Another thing that jumps out is that you report that he passed 2 lie detector tests. Do you know if these were given by law enforcement or his own attorney?
Well, it was law enforcement, and his own attorneys found the law enforcement officers to do it. So they were legitimate lie detector tests. He did pass them, and and I sat with him for an hour and a half. And you, Kevin, you know what it's like when you're at an interview. You're trying to get a feel for the person. You're like, are they telling me the truth, or is this person truthful? He was very calm. He wasn't one of these people who's waving his hands in the air and yelling and screaming. I'm jumping up and down. He was just very, very matter of fact, straightforward. I'm innocent. I didn't do this, and it was an interesting interview.
Would you say that the police and/or the Attorney General don't think that the allegations are credible, or that they do think that they're credible, but because of the amount of time that's gone by, the statute of limitations has hindered them?
Well, this is a sticky point because both agencies, the state AG's office would only, send me that one statement that said, due to statute of limitations, they did use the word unfortunately, which I thought was interesting. They said, we did investigate this case, but unfortunately, due to the statute of limitations, we cannot, prosecute it. And the same thing happened with the county prosecutor. The Macomb County Sheriff's Office, they sought first-degree criminal sexual conduct charges against Father Perone, and due to statute of limitations, they couldn't bring it either. I don't know what the prosecutor's office thought about it. I do know that the detective who handled the case for the Macomb County Prosecutor's Office want it to go forward. Of course, the parishioners also have a real beef with her. They think that she's sort of twisted this man's words, that she mishandled this investigation. They've sort of portrayed her as a rogue detective who put things in a report that she shouldn't have. And I guess, in some ways she did acknowledge writing. I mean, I read her report, and she did acknowledge that he never did tell her he was sodomized. Yet she put it in her report. So there's no real explanation for that other than her saying, well, what he was telling me made it seem that way. When I asked him, do you know what sodomy means? He answered nodding his head. So her reason for putting a lot of stuff on her reports was that he just simply couldn't answer verbally, but he nodded his head.
The allegations were from a long time ago, the early 80s, but they also come from two different people, which usually adds some credibility. Can you tell us about the two allegations and the credibility that may or may not exist?
Sure. Well, they are, they were not friends. They did not go to school together. And they both were altar servers for Father Peroni at a little bit at different times, I think it was. But the Father Peroni maintains that he does not know the second one at all, and that he never was an altar server for him. And the plaintiffs have tried to dispute that he was. Now, I've heard from the Archdiocese, they have church bulletins that show this kid's name at the church. So, that he was in fact an altar server who did serve under Father Peroni. But the first accuser, he's how his whole story came about was pretty telling in itself. He was, having, he was discussing this with his wife. He and his wife were having some problems, and he just blurted it out. By the way, this is what happened to me. It was during a heated discussion with his wife, and she's the one that picked up the phone and called the Archdiocese and said, "Oh my gosh, you need to know this. My husband was abused by his priest. Please look into it." Go ahead.
The final say on this is going to come from Rome, but the church has taken some action. What have they done with this particular priest?
Well, what the church did after the investigation is they removed him. After I think almost more than a year after finding out, they did their investigations, and then on July 5th they said we have a credible allegation, and until the Vatican decides this, you're not going to be a priest here, and you can't have any contact with anybody from the parish in any way, shape, or form, and you can't wear your priest clothing, or you cannot do anything that remotely looks priestly.
All right, Theresa, thanks for checking in with us. We'll continue to follow your reporting in the Free Press.
All right, thanks, Kevin.
All right, we'll be right back with more news now after this. His job as the mayor of Rochester Hills keeps him busy, and his role as the 77th president of the U.S. Conference of Mayors has him rubbing elbows with the President of the United States at the White House. Mayor Barnett joins us now in studio. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
So that's kind of a cool trip you had in January, to head to the White House and watch legislation be signed into law. Can you just kind of tell us what that's like for people who are stuck out at the gate looking at the White House from afar?
Sure. I've been blessed to be the mayor of Rochester Hills for 13 years now. And so in that time, I've been invited by both President Obama and President Trump, and have seen both White Houses in action. And so general philosophy is that whenever the president calls, you answer. And in this particular time, I was leading a delegation of mayors to Washington, D.C. for the United States Conference of Mayors winter meeting. And the president's people called and said, "Would you like to come over for a bill signing?" And of course, when I got there, they said the president would like to meet with you privately, and he'd like you to stand behind him for the signing. And of course, I thought, well, that's fantastic. You get a chance to be in the White House, obviously one of the most powerful buildings in the world, and really the people's house, where it's still kind of amazing that as an everyday citizen, even though I am the mayor, that I can be there and participate in meetings with the president's top level staff. And this was really interesting. There were two. I was actually there in the White House twice in 1 week for two separate bill signings. Right. One for the USMCA, which is a huge deal for Southeast Michigan. Our largest trading partner is Mexico, and the relationship we have, kind of updating NAFTA, was really critical. A lot of my companies contacted me, said it was important. But the one that I was involved in particularly that you mentioned, was this one about protecting religious institutions from terrorism. And the president said, "Stand behind me." As he was signing his signature, which looks like an earthquake tremor, he looked over at me and he said, "It's a pretty famous signature." I said, "It is, Mr. President." And then he capped his pen and he gave me the pen. So it was a pretty interesting moment to be there for something like that. And, always there in the guise of trying to represent my community.
And where in the White House was that particular signing?
That was in the East Room.
It was in the East Room.
Yeah.
Okay. And so, as you walk around, you're looking around, you're swiping dishes or whatever it is you're doing.
Well, I probably shouldn't admit this, but I do steal something every time I'm in the White House, and it's the White House napkins that have the seal of the president. So I usually end up with a few extra. This is probably really bad to admit, a few extra in my coat pocket, and then I give them away to fourth grade tours that come through. If a student answers a question, I give one away to each class, and the students are really amazed that this is one of the president's napkins, but it's like I said, it's a chance for me. Ultimately, it's a chance to have the city of Rochester Hills and Southeast Michigan's voice at the table. And so this particular president, President Trump, has invited me to talk about to the White House, I think 8 times in the last 2 years, to talk about everything from the economy to urban issues to the census. So listen, every time any president or governor invites you, I think it's incumbent upon me to be a part of that conversation and represent the perspective of my city.
Now, has all of that been as part of the Conference of Mayors, your participation in that?
Most of it is somehow related to that. Obviously, I've developed relationships with key White House staff that have me coming in for certain things, not necessarily under the guise of the U.S. Conference of Mayors, but largely most of them are sometimes with other mayors and usually, trying to gather. Sometimes the White House will say, "Can you bring a group of mayors?" And they'll ask me to put together a group of 10 or 12 mayors to talk about a subject.
Tell me a little bit about the signing of the bill, the security, $375 million. It's an issue for everybody. We see it when it pops off on the news, but really every local church is dealing with it.
Well, if you think about where a lot of these mass shootings have happened, and even just in 2019, they've been in mosques, in synagogues, in small Baptist rural churches, and so I think there's a real tendency now to take a look at how you're protecting houses of worship, and this bill in particular is designed to protect some of those most vulnerable houses of worship. Think synagogues and mosques, and in my community, we have lots of houses of worship, but we're building the second largest mosque in Southeast Michigan, and so I think some of that is identified as these places are unfortunately likely to be targets, and this is a way that we can kind of talk not just about providing security from a preparation standpoint, but also providing some resources as well.
And having the support of Washington, whether it doesn't matter which president it is, but having the support of Washington must mean something to the local people in your community that are at the churches.
Yeah. The era of sort of handouts from Washington D.C. has been gone for about a decade. You used to go to Washington and say, I'd like money for this bill, and I've been successful on those in the past, but that's completely gone. The gridlock has really divided the nation in a partisan standpoint, particularly in Washington D.C. And so when you have a program or a bill that is going to send money back to your local community, it's extremely rare that it receives bipartisan support, which this bill did, and it's also extremely, it's extremely unusual to be invited to something like that. So they actually mentioned when they talked with me about being there for that signing, they actually mentioned the IAG, which is the Islamic Association of Greater Detroit, that particular mosque. So they had it in their mind that this is a place that is going to be obviously eligible for funding from this particular bill. So for me, it was a way to advocate for something actually in my community to bring back money from Washington, and that's ultimately part of my job.
Washington is so divisive these days, but when you go as a group of mayors, you're kind of coming as one voice. You're Democrats, Republicans, Independents as mayors, but you really need to form together to be heard about things that you all need. How does that actually work when you get there?
Yeah, Kevin, I think it's beautiful. It's really the last bastion of nonpartisanship in America. Even here locally, Mayor Duggan and I are close. I want to see him succeed. If there's anything I can do to help him succeed, he knows that I'm there for him. And I know the same is true for him. And he's shown me that. He's been to Rochester Hills multiple times to work on issues that are important to me, as I have been in the city of Detroit. That's what's unique in American politics right now, the local level, where we have more trust. If you ask residents across your viewership, more folks trust local levels of government because they see the partisanship and the gridlock in the state government and in the federal government. So we're trying to use that trust that we have from the residents and that ability to work together to be a different voice in Washington. We were there just a couple weeks ago during the week of impeachment, and boy, it is just it is just jammed up. But you had Republicans and Democrats standing together talking about the need for us to conduct a successful census, about our shared vision to do something strong on opioids, about a shared vision to try and combat homelessness. So there's a lot of working together among mayors.
All right, we'll get into those issues when we come back. There'll be more news now after this. It has already been a big year for the mayor of Rochester Hills, who was at the White House as the president of the U.S. Conference of Mayors. Brian Barnett is also trying to get work done right here in Michigan. So you've built up that relationship with mayors all across the country, and you building and have built a relationship with people in Washington, D.C. How does that translate for the residents that elected you in Rochester Hills?
Yeah. Well, the one interesting thing that you learn as you meet other mayors is that so many of our problems are not unique. The mayor of Houston has the same challenges of picking up trash as I do. It's just he's got more folks, right? So when someone has a unique or innovative solution, whether it's how to engage your residents, how to pick up trash, how to pave roads, whatever it might be, you can usually apply those locally. And the one unique thing about being mayor is that there's only one in every city, right? You get all the attorneys together in your city, you could fill 2, 3, 5, 10 tables. Same with dentists, same with accountants. But if you really want to learn about how to be a decent mayor, good at your job, you really have to go outside of your community because there's only one. So, when we go out and when I meet these other mayors, I'm getting a chance to meet some of the best and brightest minds in the country, find out what they're doing. I take a local problem, like, what are you doing new with recycling? Or what's the coolest civic engagement you have? Those are the things I come back and, okay, how could we adapt that to make it work in Rochester Hills? I think we've got, lots of great examples. I give you one, trying to develop a unique park. We're building a new park. So I talked to some of these mayors from around the country. What are the most unique things? And the park that we're building, I think it's called Innovation Hills, is really cool. It's the only park that we can find anywhere that has glow-in-the-dark sidewalks that we just unveiled in October. But for the opportunity to talk with people and think, what draws people to this thing in your community? What is the most unique way, or the biggest celebration you have? How do you do it? How does it run? How do you keep people safe? That idea sharing, that best practices is something really valuable, and that's something that I think has benefited my community.
So with the U.S. Conference of Mayors, you have one voice going to Washington. You don't want to be Republicans or Democrats. You want to be one solid voice. What about here in the state of Michigan? Do the mayors of Michigan go to Lansing with one voice to try and talk to the governor and lawmakers?
Yeah, they do. There's a fantastic organization called the Michigan Municipal League, which represents Michigan municipalities on a variety of issues. There's a smaller group called SEMCOG, Southeast Michigan Council of Governments, which really looks at the 7 counties of Southeast Michigan, probably this general listening area. But then, even as you're advocating, sometimes you have difference of opinions. So many communities like ours have personal government relation folks that might say, okay, we have a slightly different opinion on how we'd like to see this executed or implemented in the region. But I mean, generally, again, like I go back to it because I think this is so rare. Folks are tired of turning on the television and there's debates, and it's just this partisan divide. I win at your expense. I win if you lose, and that's how you advance.
Win or else.
Yeah, and I think in the world of mayordom, it isn't like that, because mayors, city council people, others, they live, they go to church, they shop. I mean, it's really easy to get a hold of me. Everybody I serve lives within about 3 miles of my physical house. Not that I'm inviting them over, but I'm pretty easy to find. And so, you can't hide behind sort of these, this pontification or these speeches. You really have to get things done, because the next time I go to church, the next time I'm at my kid's event at school, someone's going to say, when is this road opening? What's the deal? When is that building going to be done? And so there's a real desire to get things done. And in order to get things done, you have to work with people that might not always agree with you.
So you just mentioned roads, and when you think of the governor, you have to think of roads because she's going to get the damn roads fixed. Mm-hmm. But how does that relate for a mayor? I mean, you have roads in Rochester Hills. How do you get heard about your roads when they're talking about trunk lines and other roads? How do you fit into the equation?
Well, you have to be really creative. And again, this is an example where if we were, bitterly partisan, it doesn't do me any good. It doesn't do, I want the governor to be successful too. I want the president to be successful. And as you saw on State of the Union night, those two couldn't be more diametrically opposed.
Right.
But Rochester Hills can benefit both from President Trump and from Governor Whitmer, if we're willing to play with both of them. If we're showing, here's what we're willing to do. You know, we offer up this road as a test. We'll partner. We'll put in some of our money if we can get some of yours. We want to come with solutions. We want to sit on committees. We offer up our community to be a pilot for something unique that you might have planned, and we'll help you get through the red tape in our community. So you know, for us, we own a lot of the local roads, like the road that my house is on, the road that most of the houses are on in our community. The interior roads are ours, but a lot of the trunk lines are county roads. So we have to work with the county, we have to work with the state, roads like M59 and Rochester Road. It's all about collaboration. If you do it well, you can be successful in this way. You know, if you get out there too far down this partisan road, you're not going to bring back results for your city.
So what are the issues that residents bring to you as the mayor of Rochester Hills? Are they just the same as everyone has, or are they unique? I imagine you have to deal with things like the opioid crisis more than, say, homelessness, but both probably affect Rochester Hills as much as anyone else in Southeast Michigan.
You know, I mean, as president of the U.S. Conference of Mayors, this title of America's Mayor right now, three things that we're working on: infrastructure, inclusion, and innovation. And those three big, broad categories, as you drill down in those, every city, from Detroit to Los Angeles to a small suburban community in Oklahoma to Rochester Hills, have issues in those regards. My infrastructure issues aren't a port or an airport, but they're major streets, you know, and trying to figure out how to solve streets and bridges. Innovation, everybody's trying to figure out how to bring innovation to do things more efficiently, effectively. You know, some of the private sector things are brilliant. We just haven't learned how to adopt them into the public sector yet. And inclusion, we're all having changing communities. We all are dealing with the fact that a lot of people think of Rochester Hills as one vision, but we're not. We're a lot of different people, a lot of different religious beliefs, cultural beliefs, and so trying to incorporate all those things in. If I were to ask you the biggest complaint in my city, it's probably two. Deer. We hit a lot of deer in Rochester Hills, and traffic congestion, which is a common problem in suburban America. So how you handle those, how do you handle construction, the fact that we're a place that a lot of people want to be. We've been incredibly successful as a community, and that draws people. People want to be in Rochester Hills for the schools, for the amenities and the resources. But with that comes traffic, congestion, and higher priced homes. And so there's always some challenges that you have to be innovative and in how you're trying to build collaborations to deal with those issues.
All right. I appreciate you being in and sharing your thoughts on all of this.
Hey, thanks for having me.
All right. That's our show for tonight. Thanks for watching. For everyone at News Now, I'm Kevin Dietz. Good night.